I wonder what the over-under is on whether or not there's going to be an intro video every week. I mean, you guys actually, is there anything like that going on? Because we have an intro video, and yet it feels like every week we're just right in that place of, you know what, we just need to get to exactly what it is that God wants to say. And I thank the team for bringing us to that very place. You know, I was thinking about that this week. I mean, if I were to ask you this morning, how many of you have trouble starting a job? Or how many of you have trouble finishing a job? You know, are you the people who struggle starting, or do you struggle finishing? I think for some of us, we struggle starting, right? You see the work that needs to be done, you see the enormity of the task, and you think to yourself, man, I will never be able to do that. And so it's far easier for me just to stay on the couch and not to worry about doing that. I mean, for some of you, it's like, hey, I don't know if I could even start that. So you think about different things that are going on in your own life. Maybe it's a home improvement project, right? And it's like, man, I will never be able to do that. And so you don't. Maybe for you, it's this, I want to go back to school and I want to learn something. And so, but you're thinking to yourself, but I don't know if I could start a new career. Some of you are thinking, boy, I know I need to lose some weight, but I don't even know if I can even start this process. I mean, some of you have other things. Maybe there's something going on in your marriage, and you're like, man, I don't even know if I could start working on it. So you get it. You have those things where you have trouble starting. On the other hand, there are people who have trouble finishing, right? Maybe for you, you've got 1,000,001 things. You've got all of these different ideas, right? I mean, you've got people who think, all right, I'm going to do this. And then it's like, all right, well, I'm going to be on to that. And then I'm going to do this. And so for some of you, you have the carcasses of begun projects that haven't been finished all over your house, right? So for some of you, it's home improvement projects. Maybe you started on the bathroom, and you're like, all right, this is great. Oh, but you know what? I should do the bedroom too. And so suddenly you're now working on the bedroom. And then as you're working on the bedroom, you're like, yeah, but you know what? I've also wanted to do some work on the kitchen. And so you start the work on the kitchen, and suddenly you realize you have 3 projects that have been started, and you haven't finished any of them. For some of you, it's maybe that, you know what? You've started the weight loss, but you've had trouble finishing, right? And so you have the remnants of weight loss products around your house. I was thinking about that this week. I have an ab roller underneath my bed that's been there for 15 years. You know? So it's like, hey, all right, you know, I'm going to have these great abs, right? And so for 15 years, this thing has been under the bed. I started, but I never finished. I mean, for some of you, you went back to school, right? You've got the books all over, but then something happened, something changed, and so now you've got the remnants of these school textbooks around. For others of you, maybe it's these marriage workbooks that you've got all around, and so you started it, but you didn't finish. I mean, look, we get it. Some of us have trouble starting, right? Some of us have trouble finishing. And the question is, which one are you? You know, my sense would be that for most of us, we have a more difficult time finishing projects. You know, we have the dreams, we have the visions, we have the things that we believe that we want to do or that we're called to do. And so we start, but then something happens along the way. I mean, how many of you have been in a place where you've just gotten burned out? You know, you started strong, you're like, this is going to be great, and then somewhere along the way, it's just, you just stumble and you falter, and suddenly, you know, a project that you had started, you just haven't finished. And yet, you know, we look at a story like Nehemiah, and we were saying last week that maybe for some of us, we have trouble relating, because it seems like for Nehemiah, everything has gone right. But here's a perfect example of a man who started a project, and he's not going to let anything deter him from finishing. And I think we can learn a lot from that, because here's a man who had this discontented heart, right? He saw something that needed to be done. He saw the wall around Jerusalem that had been in rubble for over 100 years. He saw something and said, you know what, God, this discontented heart, I see that something needs to be done, and God, you're calling me to do it, and so I'm going to go. And he goes and he asks the king for permission, and he prays about it. He goes and he begins the work. He begins to assemble the people. They begin doing the work. And all along, there's all of these things that happen. The enemy outside the gates and the enemy inside the gate. But you know what's amazing about the book of Nehemiah is that here he had all of these distractions, but they never stopped him from doing the work. He knew that he had a project that he had begun, and he knew that it was going to be God who was going to be faithful to complete it through him. And so I believe that as we look at this story, we're going to learn some incredible things. That Nehemiah never stopped taking his eyes off of God. When the distractions came and tried to get him to stop and not to finish, what did he say? In the past, he says this: remember our God who is awesome, and fight. Last week, we were learning, and he said this, that out of reverence for God, I will not act like that. What we see is that Nehemiah never took his eyes off of God. And what we're going to be talking about together today, if we want to finish the work that God has started in us and through us, we need to keep our eyes fixed on him. So the questions become, how do we walk through life and not get distracted? Distractions come, but how do we keep moving through those distractions? Keeping our eyes fixed on God. I want to encourage you this morning, if you've brought your Bibles, we're going to be spending some time together in the book of Nehemiah. We're in chapter 6 this week. And so if you didn't bring them and you aren't able to follow along, of course, you're going to be able to follow along on the screen behind me. I also want to invite you to take out your sermon outlines if you'd like to follow along and take a few notes as we go this morning. I want you to see a few things about Nehemiah, though. One of them is this. I want you to see how he had to face the distraction of deceit. All right? It's the distraction of deceit. Again, if you've brought your Bibles, I want you to see what verses 1 to 4 of Nehemiah 6 say. It says this: when word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a single gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not hung or set the doors in the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message: come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply: I am carrying on a great work and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Now, you see what's happening here. Here you have Sanballat, Tobiah. We've learned about them. They're the antagonists in the story. They're trying to stop the work from being accomplished. And we've learned earlier that these were the men. They were coming and they were saying, we're going to come in, we're going to kill you. And we see this, but it hasn't worked. So what do they begin to do? They change tactics. And so what they begin is to speak these things that what we learn is deceit. The enemies of Nehemiah now try to play buddy-buddy, right? You get this sense that they're saying, hey, Nehemiah, we don't know what the context of the rest of the letter said, but you get a sense that maybe it's kind of like, hey, Nehemiah, now that the work is about done, why don't you come down to us and let's talk about this. Let's celebrate the work that you've done. Or there's this sense of, hey, Nehemiah, now that the city in Jerusalem is all set, the walls are set, hey, why don't we kind of talk about how this is going to be mutually beneficial to us both? But I want you to see what's Nehemiah's response. He says, no way, right? I'm not going to fall for that. Nehemiah understands these people who had been antagonists all along the way, now that seem to be like they want to be kind of buddy-buddy. Nehemiah knows that what they're trying to do is set a trap for him. He understands that if he were to leave and to go down, you know what ends up happening? They're going to set an ambush. They're going to kill him, or they're going to send somebody in to distract the people. And then when he leaves, the work isn't going to be done. Or these people are going to come in and they're going to destroy the work that's already been done. I mean, how many of you have ever had that? Those people that all along seem to have it out for you, and suddenly it's like they want to be your friend. They want to be chummy. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, wait, why do you want this? Like, what's going on? You know that something is up. You know that something's wrong. Nehemiah sees this, right? This deceit. He understands that they're trying to tempt him away. What they're doing is they are providing a distraction, and this is the distraction of deceit. But what is it that Nehemiah says? Notice what he says. He says, I am doing a great work, right? I cannot come down because I'm doing this great work. Notice, Nehemiah keeps his eyes fixed on God. He is not going to come down. He is saying to them, there is nothing that is going to distract me away from the work that God is doing. He says, oh no to oh no, right? He says, I'm not doing that. I'm not falling for that. I am not coming down. And I think that we learn something about this. To step down is to come down. When you know that you have been given a work that God has called you to do, and then the deceit comes and says, hey, why don't you take your eyes off of this great work? When you take your eyes off of God and you come down, what you end up doing is you step down instead of stepping with God into the greatness. Now, think about this. There's a story that's told about a missionary back in the 20th century, early 20th century, this missionary to China. And while this missionary is there and he's working, there are some companies, they see what he's doing there. And they're like, hey, well, why don't you come and work for us? And so they said, we're going to pay you this. You're going to get this package. And he turns them down. He says, no, I won't do that. So they write back to him and they say, we're going to double your salary. We're going to double your benefits. Please come and work for us. And you know what his response was? It's not that the pay is too little. It's that the work is too small. When you know the greatness of the work that God has called you to, we shouldn't take our eyes off of that. We shouldn't settle for less. Instead of keeping our eyes fixed on God, stepping out into the things that He desires to do both in us and through us. See, God is calling us to build. In your own lives, God is calling you to build your faith, to build your walk with Him. So that when you leave this place, we can be those ministers of the gospel to our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, the people at the soccer field, that when people see you, they see God. God is calling us to build a church together, to be about His mission and ministry in this community to which He has called us. And we cannot allow our eyes to be diverted. We have to keep our eyes fixed on Him. Nehemiah reminds us not every opportunity that comes our way is heaven sent. You know, you have to be able to discern what it is. Now, not everything is going to be blatant, right? The deceit of the enemy isn't always going to be blatant. But isn't it easy to be deceived and we settle for the small things instead of focusing on the greatest of things? And that's a reminder for us together that we don't come down. We keep our eyes fixed on God. I want you to see a second thing. It's the distraction of dishonesty. It's the distraction of dishonesty. Notice, by the way, what it says in verses 5 to 9. It says, then the fifth time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king. So come, Let us meet together. I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. I mean, think about it. There are times that you know things are being told to you that you know aren't true, and you have to discern whether or not this is deceit. But sometimes there is blatant dishonesty that comes. It is an attack on your very character. And you have to be able to discern whether or not what they're saying is truth or whether it's a lie. And what we see, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, this is what they're doing. What they do is they get the rumor mill going. Hey, Nehemiah, guess what we've heard? That you're trying to plot a revolt. And guess what? Lots of people are talking about it, Nehemiah. I mean, think about it. What they do is they send an unsealed letter. In those days, a sealed letter was one that was official. An unsealed letter was one in which anybody could open it up and read it. Maybe they could erase some things. Maybe they could add some things. And so what they're doing is they're trying to take Nehemiah's eyes off of God. They're trying to get him, because now guess what? Other people have started to read this letter. And so they're trying to get him to take his eyes off of God, to be able to say, whoa, man, you know what? Maybe this is true. Nehemiah, is this what you're trying to do here? It's this outright dishonesty that we see. And what they're hoping is that this is going to get back to the king. People are going to say, well, we better stop the war, because if the king finds out what we're doing here, he's going to come in and he's going to kill us all. So we need to stop this work that God has put upon our hearts to do. But Nehemiah recognizes it for what it is. He knows that this is pure dishonesty. He understands that what they are trying to do is to get him to stop the work. By the way, isn't this the way that people so often work? I mean, how many of you have ever experienced that? You've had a conversation, you've had a letter that's been shared, you've had something happen where they share something or accuse you of something, and you know it's not true. I mean, how many of you, see, this can happen a lot of times with pastors, this sort of thing. Let me share with you just one small example. Back when we were up in Pennsylvania, I had preached a message one morning, and the name of the message was, What If God Was One of Us? Right? It was based on the song, the Joan Osborne song, right? You know, we were trying to say, you know, for people who say, well, was Jesus real? Did he really walk this earth? What if God really was one of us and we were walking through it? Well, the very next day, I go back to the office, and there in my mailbox is a letter. And attached to that letter is my sermon outline. And all along, every time I had said, what if God was one of us, they had circled it. And they said, the correct usage is, what if God were one of us? They were my grammar grouch, right? So the entire time I'm reading this, and I'm like, did you not listen to a word I said? Like, seriously, I know English, but we were quoting a song. And so the entire time I'm thinking, they're sitting there not even thinking about what's being said. Instead, they're sharing with me this letter. Now, that's a small example. I've got friends of mine in the ministry. I've only experienced this a little bit, where you get a letter in the mailbox, and then people say, well, people are talking, right? Isn't that the way it always works? It's like, well, this is what I feel, and a lot of other people are saying this too. And of course, if you were to confront them, by the way, aren't the letters always anonymous, right? And then at the bottom, you know, it's like other people are talking. And if you were to ask them, well, who is saying this? Well, everybody. Come on. Really? But isn't it amazing how those distractions work? Right? They try to get you to take your eyes off of what it is that you're supposed to be doing, and instead now you're beginning to focus on the distractions. But see, I love what Nehemiah's response is. Nehemiah doesn't fly off the handle, right? You don't get a sense that he's screaming and yelling, but notice what he's saying. Nothing like that is happening. You guys are out of your minds, right? I mean, Nehemiah understood. See, they were questioning his loyalty to the king. But Nehemiah knew he was loyal to the king, but he was also loyal to the king. And he wasn't going to let them distract him away from that. And so he simply responds to them, you guys are out of your minds. He wouldn't be distracted. Now, as we've been saying, some of you maybe you look at Nehemiah and you're like, boy, it's amazing how this man handled these distractions. And I don't know if I could do it. You have to understand, Nehemiah wasn't some superhuman being. He faced the same things that you and I face. And yet what we see him being able to do is to keep his eyes fixed on God. Because you know what he does? Notice what he says at the very end. He says, now strengthen my hands. He prays to God. In the midst of the distractions and the dishonesty, he prays and he says, God, I need you to strengthen my hands. It's easy to get distracted, but now we see on two separate occasions, Nehemiah says, I'm not coming down to you. And God, I need you to strengthen my hands. He keeps his eyes fixed on God. Third, it's the distraction of fear. I want you to see the distraction of fear. If we pick up at the 10th verse, notice what it says. One day, I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, and the son of Mehethabel, who was shut in at his home. He said, let us meet in the house of God inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. But he said, should a man like me run away? Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this. And then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah and how she and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me. Now, think about what we've just read here for a moment. See, what's happening is this. We don't get a sense of who this Shemaiah is. You think, you kind of almost sense that he's a prophet of some sort, that at least he's displaying himself as a prophet. And so he comes to Nehemiah and he's saying to Nehemiah, hey, Nehemiah, these guys are trying to come and kill you. Why don't you go and hide in the temple? Now, you have to understand, there are some scholars, they look at this and they would say that, see, for a lay person to enter into the temple, you read the book of Numbers, it would be a sin. And so Nehemiah says, I'm not going to sin against the Lord. What we see in verse 13, I'm not going to go and sin against God by going into the temple. But if you look, and we'll see this later on in the book of Nehemiah, he does go into the temple a little bit later on to evict Tobiah. So there's a sense of that. But other scholars think this. See, based on Nehemiah's response, what does he say? I'm not going to the temple because I'm not afraid. He trusts God, that the greater sin would be for him to say, you know what, you're right, God, I don't trust in you, so I'm going to try to hide in the temple. Instead, he's saying, no, because I trust you, God, because I see your hand at work in my life. I'm not going to fall for the schemes of this man. He ends up finding out, he knows that this man is nothing but a deceiver who's trying to fill him with fear. And he says, no, I will not sin. I will not do that. And by the way, this is a great reminder for us that sometimes in life there will be people who present themselves as a prophet to you, that they are going to speak God's word to you. But this is what you have to discern. Anything that conflicts with what God has already said in his word is a lie. And so when people try to convince you of things, and try to say things to you and get you to discredit you, to make you fear, if it goes against what God has said in his word, what God has said he desires to do in you and through you, then you know it's a lie, and you need to understand and claim that as a lie. You keep your eyes fixed on God. By the way, the other thing that we learn is that there is always distractions that come. You call them the tyranny of the urgent, right? These things that are like, well, you got to do this and you got to do it right now. And it's always the small things. I mean, think about it in your life and in your business and in your family. There's always the things that battle for your time. There's always the things that battle for your energy and for your focus. And at some point, they seem like they're important, but in the end, it's not the main thing. You have to remember, you have to keep the main thing, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. See, we can get distracted. Churches can get distracted. We focus on all of these other things instead of focusing on the main thing. This is why we talk about as a church, we want to be about worship, groups, and mission. We want to connect people to God in worship. We want to connect people to each other in groups and connect them to God. And we want to connect our church to the community, right? We can get distracted with all of these other things. But look, we get it. Our lives, they're so busy. We're always running here and there and everywhere. So keep the main thing. And in your life, you can be so easily distracted. Don't fall for the tyranny of the urgent. Focus on what God has called you to do and to be. And I want you to see this. The fourth thing is the distraction of subversion. Let's jump down a couple of verses. Look at verses 17 to 19. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Arah, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds and telling him what I said. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. By the way, if you didn't catch this, it means that Nehemiah is related through marriage to Tobiah, so the enemy. What it means is there's a guy on the inside working against him. Think about this. You're at a family reunion, right? Could you imagine, like, if you had celebrating Thanksgivings and Christmases together? You know, hey, pass the salt, and so how's the evil plot to kill me going? You know, I mean, seriously, imagine the conversations. But Nehemiah understands that though there's this enemy that seems like is feeding information to Tobiah, they're under oath to him. He understands that, and he keeps his eyes on God. Because think about it, when you have somebody that's supposed to be a relative or a friend, and they seem to be subversive, wouldn't you get to that place of you wonder the people that you can trust? I mean, have you ever had that happen where you're like, who are the people that I can trust? Because it seems that these people, family even, I don't know if I can trust. Here's a perfect example of that. You have to be able to distinguish between truth and lies. You have to understand who the enemy is, because the enemy is always seeking to distract us, to take our eyes off of God. But by the way, if you jump back up, do you want to see what happens when you press through some of those distractions? I want you to see, what is it that verses 15 to 16 say? So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence, because they realized that this work has been done with the help of our God. They set a record for a building project. I mean, if you think about the incredible work that they had done in 52 days, they pushed through, they persevered through the distractions, through the things that were trying to make them stumble and fall. They kept getting back up, and what you see is that the other nations lost their own confidence because they followed and they said, God surely is with them. And you know, I was thinking about that this week, and I got thinking about the movie. We've seen this before, but the movie Chariots of Fire. And there's a specific scene in there that I want to share with you and show you about. Though we may stumble and fall, we need to get back up, and we need to keep going.
Gentlemen, get your marks. Get set.
Get up, lad, get up. Never do that.
Can you believe it? His head's not back yet.
Come on!
Friends, there will always be distractions. There will always be the things that seem to trip you up and to make you fall. But the question is, like Paul said to Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Are you that person who will say, though I may stumble and fall, though there are distractions that may come, I will get up. I will not falter. I will get back up and I will keep running this race that God has laid out before me because I know what is most important and I will not allow these distractions to keep me from getting back up and doing the work that I know that He has called me to do. Friends, may you be able to say, I will continue on. I will persevere. I will not allow these distractions to keep my eyes and my focus off of God. I will finish what God has started. And by doing so, that is in Nehemiah, all the nations of the earth lost their confidence because they saw that God was with them. May people see in you too that God is with you for the glory of His kingdom. Let's pray together.